What you are about to hear is something most families refuse to believe. Something that shocks daughters, confuses ex-wives, and makes married men deeply uncomfortable. Across the country, men in their 50s, 60s, and 70s have begun quietly admitting the same thing, a sentence that sounds dramatic until you understand the truth behind it. They would rather die alone than date again. And they say it without anger, without bitterness, without resentment. They say it with the calm certainty of men who have lived enough life to finally see things clearly. These are not lonely men hiding in empty apartments. These are men who built careers, raised families, survived marriages, paid mortgages, buried parents, endured heartbreak, and kept going. They are men who know what partnership requires because they lived it for decades. They are men who once believed in the dream of finding someone, building something, sharing a life. They were the ones who carried the load, held the line, kept the peace. They stayed even when they were tired. They pushed through even when it cost them. They believed that sacrifice was the price of love. And then, after the relationship ended, through divorce, death, or quiet collapse, something happened that nobody prepared them for. Not sadness, not longing, not some desperate search to replace what they lost. What arrived was relief, a deep, physical, undeniable relief, like taking off a weight they didn't even know they had been carrying for decades. For the first time in years, they breathed without tension in their chest. They woke up without bracing themselves for the day. Their home felt quiet, but not empty. Their evenings felt peaceful, not lonely. And for the first time since they were young, they realized the life they were living actually belonged to them. It's in that silence that the calculation begins, because every older man eventually runs the numbers, even if he never says it out loud. He remembers the compromises he made, the dreams he buried, the friends who faded away, the hobbies he gave up because someone else didn't approve. He remembers the emotional labor that stretched on for years without a break, the constant vigilance required to avoid conflict, the countless times he swallowed his needs to keep the household steady. And when he compares those sacrifices to the benefits he received, the math begins to shift in ways he never allowed himself to see before. Then he imagines starting again. A new relationship, a new courtship, a new negotiation of how he lives, what he likes, what he is allowed to keep for himself. He imagines the politeness phase ending and the expectations appearing. He imagines the moods, the tests, the silent punishments, the gradual erosion of his space, his time, his routines. And suddenly he realizes he is not afraid of being alone. He is afraid of losing the peace he fought so hard to rebuild. People around him panic at his decision because they don't understand what he does. They see a man choosing solitude and assume he is broken. But he's not choosing loneliness. He is choosing autonomy. He is choosing mornings where the day starts quietly and belongs entirely to him. He is choosing evenings without arguments, without tension, without negotiations. He is choosing weekends without obligations, no forced social events, no managing anyone's emotions but his own. He is choosing a life that finally matches the energy he has left. The world thinks older men are avoiding dating because they are afraid, but fear has nothing to do with it. It's clarity, it's experience, it's wisdom sharpened by years of carrying responsibilities nobody acknowledged. It's the realization that the peace they rebuilt after everything fell apart is more valuable than companionship that comes with a price they are no longer willing to pay. And here is the part nobody wants to admit. When a man reaches a certain age, his priorities shift in a way that society can't comprehend. His testosterone drops, not as a curse, but as liberation. The hormonal fog that once made him overlook red flags, chase validation, and tolerate disrespect finally lifts. And with that clarity comes a terrifying understanding. He no longer needs what he once desperately wanted. He can see people as they really are, and more importantly, he can see what relationships truly cost, not in money, but in mental energy, emotional labor, personal freedom, and quiet dignity. So when older men say they'd rather die alone than date again, they're not being dramatic. They're being honest. Honest in a way most people never are. Honest about the years they've lived and the ones they still have left. Honest about what peace feels like after decades without it. Honest about what they're no longer willing to sacrifice. And the most shocking part is this: they don't say it with sadness. They say it with certainty. Because for the first time in their entire lives, they finally understand the value of their own peace, and they are not giving it up. Not for companionship, not for romance, not for society's approval, not for anything. This is where everything truly begins. After a man tastes that kind of peace, people around him start pushing him back toward the old script. They tell him he just needs to get back out there, as if his life were a movie and he's stuck between acts. So he tries, not because he truly wants to, but because he is curious, because everyone insists he is missing out, because people keep saying it's not good for a man to be alone. So he downloads the apps, updates a profile, drags a few old photos into the digital marketplace, and steps into a world that was never designed for him. What he finds isn't romance, it's performance. He realizes quickly that he is not a person in this environment. He is a product standing on a crowded digital shelf, competing for attention from women who are endlessly swiping, endlessly comparing, endlessly filtering. He sends a message and watches it sit unread while she chats with 10 other men. If she replies, the conversation feels less like two adults getting to know each other and more like a job interview where he doesn't know the criteria. He is auditioning for the role of man who must fix everything wrong in her life without being told that is the part he's expected to play. He takes a woman out for coffee or a drink and listens to her tell him her story, the failed marriages, the ex who never appreciated her, the string of men who couldn't handle her, the emotional chaos she survived or claims she did. But as she talks, something inside him starts quietly doing calculations, not about her looks or her age, but about the emotional bill that will come due if he continues. He listens to how every ending was someone else's fault, how she never stops to wonder what she might have contributed. He notices how quickly she starts talking about what she needs from a man, what she expects, what she will not tolerate. And he realizes something brutal. She is not looking for a partner. She is looking for a retirement plan with emotional labor included. He has built a whole life. He owns his home, maybe has investments, maybe a pension, maybe just enough savings to feel safe. He has habits that keep him sane, routines that keep him grounded. Now, sitting across from a woman who barely asks about his interior world, he sees the unspoken contract forming. He will be expected to provide stability, money, emotional support, a safe house for her storms and her adult children's disasters. In return, he will get what exactly? Companionship? Some sex? A warm body on the couch beside him? Someone to tell him what to do with his weekends? When he puts it in those terms, the deal feels less like love and more like a hostile takeover disguised as romance. People accuse him of being cynical, but it isn't cynicism, it's pattern recognition. He remembers the years he spent walking into his own home like a therapist entering a session, scanning the room for mood shifts, tension in her voice, the way a slammed cabinet meant something was wrong. He remembers the way every conversation could turn into a conflict if he chose the wrong moment. The way he had to decide whether to express his opinion or keep the peace. The way his needs always seemed to be scheduled after hers, and somehow there was never enough time, enough energy, enough bandwidth left for him. Since he has been alone, that constant scanning has stopped. His nervous system has finally relaxed. His house is not just quiet, his mind is quiet. He no longer rehearses conversations in his head before saying them. He no longer lies awake wondering if he offended her that morning. He no longer wonders what version of her he will encounter when he walks through the door because there is no one to perform for, no one to soothe, no one to de-escalate. He wakes up, and the emotional climate is exactly what he decides it will be. So when well-meaning people tell him he just needs to find the right woman, he doesn't argue, but something inside him knows they are missing the point. It isn't about finding a perfect person, it's about the nature of romantic relationships themselves. No matter how kind, balanced, or emotionally mature a woman may be, a relationship still comes with a permanent job description: emotional manager, conflict negotiator, crisis responder, mood stabilizer. And he has already spent decades doing unpaid overtime in that position. His body remembers what his mind once tried to deny. The headaches, the tight chest, the constant tension in his shoulders, the blood pressure that mysteriously improved after the breakup or after she passed away. Doctors told him it was age, diet, stress. They never pointed at the weight of unending emotional labor. But when the relationship ended and his health improved, the connection became impossible to ignore. Now he can feel, on a physical level, what it costs to be plugged into someone else's emotional grid 24/7. He knows that if he allows himself to be drawn back into that system, his body will be the one paying the bill. Then there are her children. Not small kids who genuinely need raising, but fully grown adults with half-finished lives and full-blown problems. Addiction, divorces, financial instability, constant drama. The moment he steps into a serious relationship with their mother, he is drafted into their mess. Suddenly, he is expected to care about people who see him as a wallet with a heartbeat. He is family now, which really means he is on call for their emergencies, driving them, lending to them, hosting them, comforting them. None of them would have done this for him when they were younger, but now he is supposed to become grandfather, father, sponsor, and emotional shock absorber in one package. He did that job already. He raised his kids. He sacrificed for them. The idea of starting again in his 60s or 70s with people who aren't even his own blood feels less like love and more like a cruel joke.
And then there is the surveillance, the constant invisible monitoring that creeps into every modern relationship. Where were you? Why didn't you answer? Who were you with? Why are you so quiet? Why didn't you text me good night? Why didn't you like my post? It is not always loud, but it is relentless. He has lived through this before. The feeling of being observed, evaluated, measured against what she thinks a loving partner should do. The guilt trips when he wants time alone. The suspicion when he sets a boundary. The arguments that erupt not because he did anything wrong, but because he didn't perform his role with enough enthusiasm. When he imagines letting that back into his life, something inside him recoils. Not out of hatred for women, but out of self-respect for the man he has finally become. He knows he is calmer now, wiser, slower to anger, more patient. He also knows that this version of himself exists because he finally had the space to recover from decades of being stretched beyond his emotional limits. He is not willing to hand that healed version of himself back to a system that nearly destroyed him. People say he must be lonely. Sometimes he is. But loneliness is an honest feeling. It comes and goes like weather. It doesn't demand his dignity as payment. It doesn't interrogate him, doesn't drain his bank account, doesn't rearrange his house, doesn't criticize his choices. It simply reminds him he is human. And he has learned that a few moments of honest loneliness are far less painful than years of pretending he is happy in a relationship that slowly grinds him down. So he looks at the options in front of him. On one side, peace, freedom, control over his time, control over his money, control over his space, the ability to breathe without negotiation. On the other side, romance wrapped around obligation, sex wrapped around sacrifice, companionship wrapped around constant responsibility. He is not blind to the sweetness relationships can offer. He remembers the good moments, the laughter, the vacations, the intimacy. But he now sees them for what they were: moments, not the full picture, not the real cost. He no longer makes decisions based on fantasy. He makes them based on the full ledger of his life: credits and debits, gains and losses, what he gave and what he got. And when he adds it all up, the conclusion that horrifies everyone else becomes very simple to him. He would rather face the end of his life with a quiet house, a steady heartbeat, and a clear mind than spend whatever time he has left auditioning for a role he already played to exhaustion.
In the end, what terrifies everyone isn't that older men choose to be alone. It's that they choose it calmly, confidently, without a trace of regret. Their families search for explanations. Their married friends insist they're making a mistake, and society calls them selfish. But deep down, everyone knows the truth they don't want to face. A man who has lived long enough to understand the cost of peace will never trade it again. He wakes up knowing his time is finally his. He moves through the day without tension curling in his stomach. He comes home to a space that reflects his life instead of someone else's expectations. And in that quiet, he realizes something powerful. He isn't avoiding love. He isn't afraid of commitment. He simply refuses to return to a life where his happiness depends on how well he manages someone else's emotions. People think he will soften with age. They think loneliness will break him. But loneliness doesn't scare a man who spent years feeling alone inside a relationship. Peace is not a void for him. It is a reward he earned after decades of sacrifice, a reward he intends to protect. So when he says he would rather die alone, it isn't despair. It's clarity. It's maturity. It's a man finally choosing himself without apology. He steps into the rest of his life knowing he isn't running from anything. He is walking toward a future shaped entirely by his own hands. And he knows, without a doubt, that this time he will live on his own terms.